Good morning. Yes, Ms Ward.
Good morning, Your Honour. Your Honour, today, Your Honour will hear evidence in relation to the Charlies Forest and Clyde Mountain fires, and the first witness is Detective Senior Constable Jeff Horn.
Yes, thank you.
Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Have a seat. Thank you, Detective.
Detective, would you state your full name, rank and station?
Jeffrey Horn, Detective Senior Constable, Arson Unit, State Crime Command.
Are you the officer in charge of the Coronial investigation into a fire known as the Charlies Forest fire?
I am.
And in that capacity, have you provided a statement dated the 17th of May 2021?
Yes.
Are you the officer in charge of a Coronial investigation into a fire known as the Clyde Mountain fire?
I am.
And in that capacity, have you provided a statement dated the 17th of May 2021?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions this morning, firstly in relation to the Charlies Forest fire. Detective, is it the case that part of the Currawong fire ultimately crossed into the Queanbeyan-Pallarang local government area and the Eurobodalla local government area?
That's correct.
And did the Currawong fire originate in the Shoalhaven local government area?
Yes.
That part of the Currawong fire that crossed into the Queanbeyan-Pallarang LGA and the Eurobodalla LGA was given a separate name. Is that right?
Yes.
Who gave the fire that separate name?
The Rural Fire Service.
And do you know why it was given a separate name?
Yes, it's done under, I believe, their administrative guidelines when a new incident management team is going to take over the management of a fire when it enters a new local government area.
And the Currawong fire that spread into the Queanbeyan-Pallarang and the Eurobodalla LGAs ultimately took the name of Charlies Forest Fire. Is that correct?
Yes, for Queanbeyan-Pallarang and Clyde Mountain for Eurobodalla.
Thank you. Do you agree that in order to understand the footprint of the Charlies Forest fire, one needs to understand something about the boundaries between various local government areas?
Yes.
I'm going to ask for page 1429 of the brief to be shown on the screen. If you have it there in hard copy, Detective, please turn it up, but it will also appear on the screen shortly. Do you see there a sketch or site plan prepared by Darren Howe, the RFS fire investigator for the Charlies Forest fire?
Yes.
And is that a sketch or plan that you have seen before?
Yes.
Could you just orientate the court to the sketch by explaining what the red lines represent?
So I believe they're boundaries for local government areas
All right.
as best can be described on that map, yeah.
And then moving left to right, does it show the various local government areas affected once the Currawong fire crossed from the Shoalhaven LGA, being firstly the Queanbeyan-Pallarang LGA to the far left and the Eurobodalla LGA in the centre?
Yes, it does.
And did part of your investigation into the cause and origin of the Charlies Forest fire focus on this particular area where the three local governments areas share a common boundary?
Yes, it did.
All right, we might return to that in a moment. Actually, before we do, it's also important in understanding the footprint of this fire, Detective, to note the presence of the King's Highway. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And it's the road that's marked coming down from the top of the site plan on the left-hand side and then it ultimately passes across to the bottom right of the site plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If we just keep that site plan on the screen for a moment, is it fair to say that the origin of the Currawong fire in the Currawong State Forest lies somewhere to the top right-hand corner of that site plan?
Yes.
Within the Shoalhaven LGA?
That's correct.
And it stands to reason, doesn't it, that the part of the Currawong fire that crossed into the Eurobodalla LGA and ultimately given the name of the Clyde Mountain Fire must lie somewhere to the bottom right of that map.
That's correct.
In your statement, Detective, you say that Charlie's Forest Fire came into effect on the 23rd of December 2019. Do you recall saying that in your statement? And what do you mean by came into effect on that date?
When it was declared as a separate incident with a separate declaration by the RFS, and management was transferred to a different IMT.
Is the date of 23 December 2019 otherwise a significant date in terms of fire spread or when it crossed the boundaries for this fire? Or is it a date that you've relied on because it refers to the administrative decision to create a separate name for this fire?
Yeah, that's correct. So I've relied on that date because that's when the administrative decision was made. However, it had crossed prior to that date into Queanbeyan.
Right. In the course of your investigation, did you obtain 2 cause and origin reports? The first from Detective Sergeant Matt Gibb of the Forensic Evidence and Technical Services Command.
Yes.
And the second from Darren Howell, a fire investigator with the Rural Fire Service. Did you attend any of the scene investigations that either Detective Sergeant Gibb or Darren Howell performed for the Charlie's Forest fire?
No, I didn't.
Have you read their reports? You're aware, aren't you, that they conclude, after conducting their own scene investigations, that the Charlie's Forest fire was a continuation of the Currawong fire?
Yes.
Have you any reason to doubt that conclusion?
No.
It's important, isn't it, to also consider whether there might be other alternate modes of ignition for the Charlie's Forest fire, including things such as arson or human accident.
Yes.
Was there any evidence obtained during your investigation to suggest that there might be any other source of ignition for the Charlie's Forest fire?
No, there wasn't.
And do you agree with the conclusion by the fire scene investigators that there were actually several points at which the Currawong fire crossed into the Queanbeyan-Pallarang LGA and the Eurobodalla LGA in areas within the Charlie's Forest fire and Clyde Mountain fire footprints?
Yes, I agree with their assessment.
I'll now ask you some questions that specifically focus upon the Clyde Mountain fire. Is that the name of the fire? Is Clyde Mountain the name of that part of the Currawong fire that ultimately crossed into the Eurobodalla local government area?
Yes.
And you say in your statement that it was named the Clyde Mountain Fire on the 29th of December 2019.
Yes.
Again, does that naming date refer to the occasion on which the fire was declared to have a different name and to take a different incident management team?
That's correct.
In fact, the Clyde Mountain Fire had crossed the LGA border into the Eurobodalla LGA numerous times up until through early December, up until the time that it took that name on the 29th of December. Would you agree?
I would, yes.
I'm going to ask you to have a look at a document that will now come up on screen from page 1471 of the Coronial brief. Detective, is that a map that you have obtained and included in your statement showing the outline of the Eurobadalla LGA?
Yes.
And can I ask you to orientate the court to some significant features within that map? Firstly, the presence of the Dewar National Park and the Dewar River Valley.
Yes, so you can see that towards the middle of that local government area outline.
Is the Dewar National Park and the Dewar River Valley important in understanding the actual progress of the Clyde Mountain fire?
Yes.
In what way?
There was a property owner in that vicinity that conducted a backburn on his property that got out of control and merged with the Clyde Mountain fire.
So whilst the tell me if this is a fair summary. Whilst the Clyde Mountain fire took on that name as the Currawong fire crossed into the Eurobadalla LGA, the Clyde Mountain fire later merged with a separate fire that had a different ignition point.
That's correct.
And that separate fire with a different ignition point was a smaller fire originating somewhere in the Dewar River Valley?
Yes.
Were you involved in the investigation into that Dewar Valley fire?
No.
Are you aware, though, of the outcome of the investigation?
Yes.
In terms of, was someone actually charged for lighting that fire?
Yes.
Do you know the status of those proceedings?
They're finalised at court and the person's been sentenced.
Okay, thank you. So convicted?
Yes.
Sticking to the image presently on the screen, can we see Currawong marked on that map?
Yeah, the northern boundary of the Eurobadalla LGA crosses through that towards the left of the northern boundary.
Right, so it's sitting just underneath the I'm not sure how to say it, Bimbaramala National Park.
Yes.
So can the court conclude that the Currawong State Forest firstly sits towards the far southern boundary of the Shoalhaven local government area?
Yes.
And is it fair to say one can understand how the Currawong fire then was able to cross into the Eurobadalla LGA relatively quickly after first ignition?
Yes.
Detective, was the early spread, excuse me, from the Shoalhaven local district into the Eurobadalla LGA observed by a family living on Garden Seat Road in East Lynn?
Yes, it was.
Now, East Lynn's not marked on this map, but could you give Her Honour an approximate idea as to where East Lynn might be located?
So it's on the eastern side of the Clyde River, north of Bateman's Bay. Without having the ability to blow up that map, I'd say in the vicinity of the green B52 marker, roughly.
I mean, that map really is just too large to show the fine details of even the Clyde River.
Yep.
Did you ultimately take a statement from a Ms. Batistic who has a property near East Lynn that runs down to the Clyde River?
Yes.
Could I ask you, Detective, to turn up page 1641 of the brief using the numbers, red numbers towards the bottom of the page, and in particular, paragraph 12 of your statement.
Yes.
Do you see there that you refer to having taken a statement from Ms. Batistic, but also some of the other people living in the vicinity of East Lynn who witnessed the approach of the fire?
Yes.
I'm not asking you to read. Sorry, I might not have given you the right paragraph number.
1641 is Sheridan's statement.
Sheridan's statement. Just bear with me, Detective, I'll turn it up. I'm not asking you to read the evidence out in full, but can you give a summary of what you learnt from the residents of East Lynn in terms of their observation of fire being first observed down by the Clyde River?
Certainly. So they were at the residence on the 1st of December. They've observed helicopters conducting what they described as water bucketing on a fire on the western side of the Clyde River. Over the course of the day, that fire has started spotting into their property, and they have made preliminary efforts to fight that fire.
So, as they witnessed the fire spotting across the Clyde River from the west to their properties on the east, is it your hypothesis that this is one of the early intrusions of the Currawong fire into the Eurobodalla LGA?
Yes.
Presumably the Clyde River must form part of the LGA boundary at least some point, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Did you ultimately take a statement from Ms. Batistic that gave an account of meeting up with a rural fire service truck as they were evacuating from their East Lynn property?
Yes, I did.
And was that an important statement for the purposes of your investigation?
Yeah, it proved vital, especially when obtaining evidence from RFS observations on the ground. Due to the discrepancies with the naming convention and what was then known as the Currawong fire, but later attributed to Clyde, it became very difficult to find the first crews on scene. Sheridan knew of one of the young firefighters on the first truck that attended, and through that I was able to get in touch with that senior person on the fire truck.
So is it fair to say that the eyewitness accounts from the people that witnessed the fire spread across the river extended to giving you information about the names of some of the RFS crew that turned up on the first truck?
That's correct.
Which then it permitted you to take statements from those RFS first responders?
Yes, their evidence was vital.
And indeed it helped clarify dates on which the fire was likely to have first spread.
Yes.
Now, was the information that you obtained from those eyewitnesses about timing and location of the early spread of the fire broadly corroborated by line scans and fire progression maps that were obtained by the cause and origin investigators?
Yes.
The cause and origin investigators, considering cause and origin of the Clyde Mountain fire, suggest that it was caused by spot fires emanating from ember attack from the Currawong fire as it burnt down to the western side of the Clyde River and ultimately travelled across the river.
That's correct.
Do you agree with that conclusion?
I do.
Similarly, did your investigation consider whether there might be any additional points of ignition for the Clyde Mountain fire, such as arson or human unintentional fire ignition?
Yes.
Was there any evidence to suggest any other potential cause for the Clyde Mountain fire?
No.
Your Honour, those are my questions for this.
Yes. To see if there's any other questions for you, Detective. Mr. Newton.
No questions, Your Honour.
Thanks very much, Detective.
Your Honour, we're now going to attempt to take evidence from the two cause and origin investigators for both the Charlie's Forest and the Clyde Mountain fire. Hopefully we'll have better success with the technology today than we did yesterday. We've tested it this morning and it worked well, but I said that yesterday and jinxed us. So the next two witnesses, Your Honour, will be Darren Howell and Matthew Gibb.
Do we have Darren Howell and Matthew Gibb? Can you hear and see us? We'll have a little break.
Yeah, I think I've already done it. I've already caused the problem for the day. We're going to have a little break and try and get them back. Thank you,
Right,
Your
so
Honour.
we'll just take a very short adjournment while we do that. How'd we go?
I feel like I shouldn't say anything.
Might be best.
Your Honour, we'll press on and hope that things now run smoothly. The next witnesses are firstly Mr. Darren Howell, fire investigator from the Rural Fire Service, and Detective Sergeant Matthew Gibb from New South Wales Police.
Yes. Mr. Howell and Mr. Gibb, you'll just hear from the court officer now.
Mr. Howell, I'll do your oath first. Silence, please. Do you swear by Almighty God that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Gibb, I'll do your affirmation. Silence, please. Do you solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, we're having to take your evidence remotely, but we still need to ensure that it is clear and can be clearly understood for transcription purposes. So it will be important this morning that we try not to talk over each other. Firstly, Detective Sergeant, would you state your full name, rank and your current station?
Matthew Gregory Gibb. I'm a Detective Sergeant of Police stationed at Goulburn Police Station.
And Detective, in that capacity, did you complete a cause and origin investigation into both the Charlie's Forest Fire and the Clyde Mountain Fire?
Yes.
Mr. Howell, would you state your full name, your professional address and occupation?
Darren Charles Howell. I'm attached to the Macarthur Rural Fire Service, and my occupation is a authorised fire investigator, a deputy captain of my brigade, and also a deputy captain of a remote area firefighting team.
In the capacity of being an authorised fire investigator, did you complete a fire investigation report into, firstly, the Charlie's Forest Fire and separately the Clyde Mountain Fire?
Yes.
We're just getting a little bit of feedback. All right. Sergeant, are you able to turn your speaker down, please, to just help with the feedback? Thank you. Did you each participate in an investigation of a property on the Kings Highway at Monga on the 23rd of January 2020? Firstly, Mr. Howell.
Yes.
And Detective?
Yes, we did.
Was this investigation part of your cause and origin investigation into the Charlie's Forest Fire? Detective?
Yes, it was.
What information did you access before that site inspection commenced?
On arrival at the site, Mr. Howell and I had he produced some fire progression maps, and we used those to determine where we were going to examine the scene.
And Mr. Howell, did you have access to any other information other than that described by Detective Gibb prior to the inspection at the Kings Highway address?
Just local knowledge I obtained from the Maruya Rural Fire Service incident management team prior to going out.
So you'd had a briefing with that team, had you?
That's correct.
I'm going to ask each of you to have regard to a site plan that's going to be brought up on the screen. This is from page 1428 of the Coronial brief, using the red numbers at the bottom of each page. Firstly, Mr. Howell, Are you responsible for the preparation of this site plan?
Yes,
The caption at the bottom of the site plan says it shows the location of the icon maps submitted in report. That's not visible on screen, but I'm reading from the hard copy. What does it mean to say the location of the icon maps submitted in report?
this was a map I produced from Google Maps, but the Rural Fire Service actually does progression maps as the fire travels, and the progression maps that are actually pulled out of the icons is our incident reporting system. So I can pull those maps out of our incident reporting system to obtain the information that I've put on Google Maps.
So where this map shows icon map 1, 2 and 3, is that information from the RFS that you have overlaid onto the Google map?
That's correct.
And what do those 3 icon map locations represent?
Just as the top one says, so the map 1 was showing the location where the Coronial fire crossed into the Queen Anne Palarang LGA and the Eurobadalla. So this is where we looked at taking further information to investigate the fire. The one in red shows the location the Coronial fire crossed into the Eurobadalla, which was the Clyde Mountain fire. And then the other 2 are just showing where the Coronial fire crossed into the Queen Anne Palarang. So it just gives you some concept of how the fire travelled and where it crossed into the LGAs.
Given the size of the Currowan fire, was it entirely likely that the fire was going to cross LGA boundaries at multiple sites across different days?
That's correct.
And Detective, do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No, I don't.
The site plan doesn't show the LGA boundaries, is that right, Mr. Howell?
That's correct.
But you have been able to use the RFS icon maps to determine that these 3 icon map references actually represent spread across LGA boundaries. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
And did you, prior to or after the site investigation, also consider line scans in the course of trying to establish how the Currowan fire spread and when?
Yes, we took into consideration line scans with the progression maps.
So we know that there were fire progression maps that you had available to you at the time of the site inspection. Did you also have line scans available at that time?
They were, but they didn't produce the input that was good enough to look at. So that's why we fell back to the fire progression maps.
All right. We're going to come back to this sketch 1 site plan in the course of some questions this morning. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask for page 1380 of the brief to come up on screen. And if you'll each just accept from me, this is chart 3, a fire progression map dated the 6th of December 2019. Firstly, Detective, does this map display some of the local government boundaries represented by the purple line?
Yes, it does.
And so on the far right-hand side of the map, although it's, oh yes, it is marked. Does the Shoalhaven LGA exist on the far right-hand side of the map?
Yes, it does.
And then if we move across to the left, the next LGA is the Eurobadalla, is that right?
That's right.
And then the left-hand side of the map, on the left-hand side of that purple boundary, is the Queanbeyan-Palerang LGA. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
In the top right-hand, or towards the top right-hand corner of that map, there's a reference to comms tower. Do you see that?
Yes.
And is that a relevant reference point in terms of understanding the spread of Currowan out of the Shoalhaven LGA?
Yes, it is. That's a point where the Currowan fire crossed into the Queanbeyan-Palerang LGA on the 6th of December.
So this is one of the very early spreads from Shoalhaven into Queanbeyan-Palerang. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Howe?
Yes.
Mr. Howe, Her Honour has heard some evidence that, to the effect that when a fire moves across LGA boundaries, that movement can trigger the need for a separate incident management team to be established, and the fire can be given a separate name. Are you familiar with that convention?
Yes.
Is it the case that when the Currowan fire first encroached into the Queanbeyan-Palerang LGA on the 6th of December, it didn't immediately trigger the need for a new IMT or a new name for the fire at this point?
The fire, if a fire is declared as section 44, it has a range of area that section 44 covers. So
Yes.
therefore they can extend the section 44 to cover extensions of the fire, or if the fire becomes too large, then they can actually create another section 44 and rename the fire.
I mean, practically it seems sensible that if the fire encroaches only a small distance into another LGA, there might not be any need to establish a second IMT. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it's only when the encroaching fire has reached a certain point that the RFS might make a decision that a new section 44 declaration is required. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm just going to ask for the site plan from page 1428 to come back up on the screen now. And can you tell me, Mr. Howe, does that area where the Currowan fire encroached in the vicinity of the comms tower feature on this map?
It would be in the vicinity of those icon map 3 and icon map 2.
Okay.
Up in the top.
Okay, but we can't tell whether it's icon map 2 or icon map 3.
No, because I don't have the LGAs on that, because Google wouldn't put the LGAs on, unfortunately.
Okay. We'll now turn to the map that is contained at page 1387 of the brief. Detective, can you see at the top of the page, this is a reference to a fire progression map from the 14th of December 2019. Is there any way to fix upon the time that this map was charted?
Yes, I believe on the right-hand side where it says production information, that the plot information was at 18:20 on the 14th of December 2019.
All right, thank you. That's not visible to us in court, but thank you. Again, Detective, is the comms tower, yes, still visible on this map?
Yes, it is.
Towards the top right corner, is that right?
Yes, just to the left of the blue line, vertical blue line.
This shows that the Currowan fire has extended towards the east from the incursion near the comms tower on the 6th of December. Is that correct?
It's extended towards the west. I think you'll find.
Sorry, to the west. Yeah, to the west,
Yes.
of course. Now, did the Coronial fire also cross from the Eurobadalla LGA into the Queanbeyan Palerang LGA in the vicinity of a property around 3096 of the King's Highway?
Yes, that's right.
And is that shown on this map?
I believe it was in the bottom right corner of the map. You'll see a locality of Murringenberg. I believe that's how you
Yes.
say it.
Yes.
Around that area.
Okay. If we, Mr. Howell, do you have any reason to disagree with what the detective has just said?
No.
So if we then come back to the site map at 1428, is that spread in the vicinity of the King's Highway, Murringenberg, likely to be one of the icons referred to on this map?
That's correct. Number one.
Icon 1, thank you. Now we will turn to the fire progression map that's contained within the brief at page 1394. Is this a fire progression map taken just after midnight on the 23rd of December 2019, Detective?
Yes, it is.
And what does this map show in terms of the further progression of the fire since the map of 14 December 2019?
It shows that the fire has progressed to the west from near the boundary of the Queanbeyan Palerang LGA. The fire at the top of the map seems to have stalled a bit along a containment line and along the Coronial Creek.
So we can still see the comms tower towards the top right of the map?
Yes,
correct?
That's right. Yes.
But the fire has spread to the west, past a property that is marked on the map as 4336 Kings Highway, Monga. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, is this the property that you ultimately inspected with Mr. Howell on the 23rd of January 2020?
Yes, it is.
And why was the inspection conducted at this property rather than, for example, at the comms tower or the other property on the Kings Highway where the fire had also breached LGA boundaries?
From the information that we'd received and from the fire progression maps, and also because of ease of access, that was the best location for us to examine.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Howell?
Yes.
I'm now going to ask for some photographs that were taken during that site visit, and in particular these are photographs from Detective Sergeant Gibbs' statement at page 1411 of the brief. Detective, can you explain to the court what is displayed in this photograph?
Yes, that's a view from the grazing paddocks on the eastern side of the Kings Highway inside the property at 4336 Kings Highway. It's a generally northeast view. It's showing a number of areas highlighted by the yellow arrows, small areas of spot fires from ember attack.
What does the red arrow represent?
The red arrow is a general representation of the direction of the fire. So the fire is heading from the right to the left.
Is it unusual to observe so many points of ember attack that have left some sort of evidence in on country that has such little vegetation on the ground?
It can be unusual in that they're very small, so which has been the size of those small spot fires has been affected by the lack of fuel or dry grass on the ground.
And Mr. Howe, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Mr. Howe, does the presence of that number of spot fires from ember attack permit you to conclude anything about the fire that generated that ember attack?
It just confirms with the red arrow that the embers were coming in the direction of the fire, and the embers were, as Matt said, the fuel load there and the curing of the fuel load was insufficient, so the spot overs basically self-extinguished instead of burning the entire area.
Mr. Howe, was it important during your investigation to also keep an open mind and consider any other possible cause of ignition for the Charlie's Forest fire?
Yes, we needed to look at any sort of natural or human intervention in this fire, which we were able to eliminate those causes. And then when we went to the actual site, we were able to find that it was just a continuation. It wasn't a new fire.
And Detective, do you agree with that?
Yes.
I'll now move on to your cause and origin investigation of the Clyde Mountain fire. Detective, did the cause and origin investigation include consideration of the early 000 calls made by eyewitnesses reporting fire crossing to the eastern side of the Clyde River?
Yes, it did.
And what other material did you take into account prior to or after any scene investigation for the Clyde Mountain fire?
Again, we used fire progression maps that Mr. Howe brought to the scene examination. After the examination, it was by the use of line scans.
Mr. Howe, did you have regard to any other information not referred to by Detective Sergeant Gibb?
Just discussions I had with the incident management team at Moruya prior to going out on site.
Thank you. We're going to now bring up chart 2 from page 1542 of the brief. Detective, could you please explain what we're looking at in this chart?
A map, again, taken from Google Maps. You'll see a red arrow at the top centre of the image. That depicts the residence at number 431 Garden Seat Road, East Lynn. The yellow arrow on the left-hand side bottom shows an area that I've referred to as spot over 1, and the pink arrow in the centre of the image shows an area that I've referred to in a creek line as spot over 2.
Did the property at Garden Seat Road there displayed include some sort of a dwelling or a structure down on the Clyde River that the family would use from time to time?
Yes, it did.
And is that shown on the map?
I believe it's on the bank of the Clyde River, generally in the centre of that cleared area on the right hand side.
Evidence from within the brief that I won't take you to in any detail suggests that family and friends were enjoying some time down on the Clyde River near that structure when they first observe embers spotting over from the western side of the Clyde River. Is their account of embers spotting over consistent with the observations you ultimately made when you conducted your site inspection?
Yes.
And Mr. Howell, what do you say to that?
I agree with that.
We'll now turn to a fire progression map that's contained within the brief at page 1543. Now, Detective, this is an early fire progression map for the Currawong fire in the Shoalhaven LGA, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it shows the spread of the Currawong fire across the first day of the fire, approximately. Would that be right to say?
Yes, that's right.
And then you've marked on this map the location of that East Lynn address on the eastern side of the Clyde River. Is that what's depicted with the pink arrow?
Yes, that's right.
Are you able to give an estimate of the approximate distance between the outer reach of the Currawong fire, as displayed on that map, and the East Lynn residence? And if that's too speculative, just say so.
Using the scale on the bottom right-hand corner of the progression map, it'll be approximately 4 kilometres.
Mr. Howe, do you have any reason to disagree with that?
No.
We'll now move to a line scan contained within the brief at page 1556. Mr. Howe, could you explain how the line scans are produced?
Finding that location. The line scans are just an aerial photo looking at different temperatures in the area, and it just identifies where the seat of the fire is and where the fire has already burned.
And are they physically overlaid on top of a pre-existing map, perhaps from Google or perhaps from some other source?
I think the RFS line scans, I'm sure, have done it on a program. That one looks like it's got a Google map down the bottom, but that's not I don't believe that's an RFS one unless it's been overlaid.
Detective, are you responsible for the production of this chart 16?
Yes, I am.
Right. And how did you produce it?
As Mr. Howe said, again, it's a Google Maps image. I used Photoshop to overlay the line scan images over the Google Maps image.
Is the Clyde River visible?
Yes, it is. It extends from the bottom right-hand side and travels up through the right-hand side of the map.
And does the red arrow point to the property at Garden Seat Road, East Lynn, where you ultimately conducted a scene investigation?
Yes, it does, ma'am.
What does this line scan tell you as to the movement of the fire through until that point at 20:49 at night on the 2nd of December 2019?
It shows that the Coronial fire has progressed to the west, to the south, to the east at the top of the photograph, and also southeast from the specified area of origin by Mr May and Senior Constable Hall.
We'll now move to the line scan at chart 17, page 1557. Detective, is this a close-up of part of chart 16? Because it seems to display the same date and time.
Yes, that's right.
And could you tell Her Honour what you have marked on this chart?
Yes, again, the red arrow depicts the residence at 431 Garden Seat Road. The yellow arrow identifies the area that I've identified as spot over 1, and the purple arrow identifies the area in the creek line as spot over 2.
And does this again provide further detail of the spread of the fire once it has managed to spot over the Clyde River?
Yes, it does.
Mr Howe, do you agree with that?
Yes.
We'll now have a photograph brought up on the screen from Detective Sergeant Gibbs' inspection of the property at Garden Seat Road, East Lynn. This is page 1562. Mr Howe, were you with the detective when this cause and origin scene investigation was completed?
Yes.
And Detective, could you explain to the court what is displayed within this photograph?
That's a view from the residence at 431 East Lynn Road. Garden Seat Road. It's a view looking generally west. You can see the Clyde River running through the centre of the photograph and the structure down on the riverbank.
Right, so this is a shot of the direction from which you hypothesise the fire approached. Is that right?
Yes, the general direction, yes.
And in the course of your investigation at that scene, did you observe 2 separate spot over points?
Yes.
Was that surprising to you?
No, it wasn't. The both spot overs areas were fairly well vegetated. So, yeah, no, it wasn't surprising.
As a matter of common sense, it seems entirely likely that when a fire is large enough to spot over the Clyde River, it may spot over at different points at different times. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And Mr Howe, do you have any comment to make about the observation of the 2 spot over points where the fire has managed to broach the Clyde River?
No, I agree with what the police officer said.
Finally, Mr Howe, again for the Clyde River investigation, it would be important, would it not, to exclude other potential forms of ignition, even given this evidence of spread from the Currawong fire?
That's correct.
And did you look for other potential causes of ignition?
Yes, once again, we looked for natural causes and we also looked for any human intervention, which we were unable to find.
And Detective Sergeant, do you agree with that evidence from Mr Howe?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Your Honour. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr Newton, do you have any questions of either of the witnesses?
No questions, Your Honour.
Thank you very much, Mr Howe and Mr Gibb. You're excused.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Your Honour, those are the final witnesses to be called in the hearings relating to the cluster of fires related to the Currowan fire and the inquest into the deaths of Lawrence Andrew, John Butler and Michael Campbell. Your Honour has the benefit of the documentary material contained within Exhibits 18, 19A, 20, 21 and 22, which extends to some thousands of pages. Your Honour also has the benefit of the oral testimony from the New South Wales Police Force witnesses and the Rural Fire Service witnesses that you have heard from over the course of the last 3 days. Shortly, Your Honour will also have the benefit of hearing the words of some family members from the men who died in the fire. At a later stage in Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfire season, those assisting Your Honour will formally address the court on the cause and origin of the Currowan, Charlie's Forest, Clyde Mountain, Moreton and Tianjara fires, as well as the manner and cause of the deaths of Lawrence Andrew, John Butler and Michael Campbell. In that regard, I can presently foreshadow, Your Honour, that formal submissions are likely to be made as follows. The cause of the Currowan fire was lightning strike on 25 November 2019 at approximately 10:47 p.m, and the origin of the fire was within the Currowan State Forest in a gully bordered by Mines Road, compartment 487-1 road and compartment 487-2 road. The Charlie's Forest fire, so named on 23 December 2019, was a continuation of the Currowan fire, which was itself caused by a lightning strike on 25 November 2019 at approximately 10:47 p.m. in a gully bordered by Mines Road, compartment 487-1 road and compartment 487-2 road. The fire crossed from the Shoalhaven local government area into the Queanbeyan Palerang LGA on 6 December 2019 and from the Eurobadalla LGA into the Queanbeyan Palerang LGA on various dates including 14 December 2019, 20 December 2019 and 21 December 2019. The Clyde Mountain fire, so named on 29 December 2019, was a continuation of the Currowan fire, which was itself caused by lightning strike on 25 November 2019 at approximately 10:47 p.m. in a gully bordered by Mines Road, compartment 487-road and compartment 487-2 road. The fire crossed from the Shoalhaven LGA into the Eurobadalla LGA at an area proximate to 431 Garden Seat Road, East Lynn, on or about 1 December 2019. The Moreton fire, so named on 4 January 2020, was a continuation of the Currowan fire, which was itself caused by lightning strike on 25 November 2019 at approximately 10:47 p.m. in a gully bordered by Mines Road, compartment 487-road and compartment 487-2 road. The fire crossed from the Shoalhaven LGA into the Goulburn Mulwary LGA at an area west of the Tallowa Dam on or about 1 January 2020 and into the Wingecarribee LGA at an area north of the Kangaroo River on or about 4 January 2020. Your Honour, the cause of the Tianjara fire remains undetermined due to insufficient evidence. The origin of the fire was at an area proximate to the roadside of Braidwood Road in the vicinity of the intersection with 12 Mile Road, Tianjara, on 19 December 2019, sometime prior to 5:15 a.m. Turning then to the inquests, I anticipate the counsel assisting will ultimately submit that Lawrence Andrew died on the afternoon of 31 December 2019 at 16 Myrtle Gully Road, Yatta Yatta, from chronic coronary artery arteriosclerosis in the context of firefighting while attempting to protect his property during the Currowan fire. That John Butler died on the afternoon of 31 December 2019 at 8A Tierney Road, Yatta Yatta, from thermal injuries, incineration, as the result of the Currowan fire. And finally, that Michael Campbell died on 31 December 2019 at 26 Wanderer Road, Sussex Inlet, from effects of fire as the result of the Currowan fire. Your Honour, could I now invite you to formally stand these matters over to the 5th of September 2022, but also note that if the court will grant us a short adjournment to confirm some final things with the families, we would then reconvene and I will read some short family statements on behalf of the men that died during the Currowan fire.
Would you like me to take the morning adjournment of
If that's
half an hour?
convenient to Your Honour.
All right, we'll come back at 11:50 for the family statements, and I do stand over these matters to the 5th of September 2022. Thank you.
Silence, please. All stand. This coroner's voice is temporarily adjourned.
Yes, Ms Ward.
Your Honour, the Coronial proceedings will now conclude with some short family statements. It's unusual even in this jurisdiction, Your Honour, for 3 family statements to be given in consecutive order, particularly in circumstances where the deceased were not related to each other. And whilst there's much sadness in the statements that follow, there is also much love. Michael John Campbell was born on the 30th of September 1957 and lived in Sussex Inlet for many years. He bought a bush block at 26 Wanderer Road, Sussex Inlet, with his former wife Sue, where he ultimately lived in the final years of his life and after he and Sue separated. Michael was father to Laura, Michael and Ryan. Your Honour was able to visit the bush block where Michael lived and died when Your Honour conducted a view of the scenes associated with the Coronial fires in June of this year. Michael had neighbours and friends who checked upon him in the aftermath of the fire, and in particular his friend Stephen Daly, who found Michael's body. Stephen and Michael had been friends for about 40 years. Stephen is saddened by Michael's death, and Michael's own family are struggling with the aftermath of his death. Your Honour, when reflecting upon the circumstances of Michael's death, it might also be an opportune moment to reflect upon the act of some of the first responders involved in the Coronial fire, and in particular Senior Constable Brendan Keenan, K-E-E-N-A-N, of the Lake Illawarra Highway Patrol, who was rostered to Sussex Inlet on the 31st of December 2019 in response to the bushfires. Senior Constable Keenan hasn't given evidence this week, but he has provided a statement, which is in the brief of evidence, and more importantly, Your Honour has the benefit of some footage taken by Senior Constable Keenan as he approached the bush block where Michael was found. The Senior Constable had been flagged down by Stephen Daly after Stephen attended the bush block and discovered Michael's body. So Stephen returned with Senior Constable Keenan, pointed to the vicinity of Michael's car where Michael was found, and Stephen was then able to leave the block. When Your Honour watches that audio-visual footage of the way in which Senior Constable Keenan conducts himself, both with Stephen, who is obviously saddened at the death of his friend, but also the way in which the Senior Constable conducts himself as he conducts a view of the scene where Michael is found within the car, Your Honour will be impressed by the kindness and the respect that Senior Constable Keenan demonstrates both to Stephen but also to Michael Campbell himself. Your Honour, I'll now read a statement relating to the death of John Ronald Butler, or Butt, provided by his family. And there'll be a number of photos that are brought up onto the screen as I read the statement out, starting with this photo, which we understand was taken in 1947. And it shows Butt with his mum Ruby and his sisters Beth and Ruth. And John can be seen in this photo holding a pet cat. John Ronald Butler, or Butt, was born in Milton, New South Wales on the 17th of March 1944. He was the third child of John and Ruby Butler and the younger brother to Elizabeth, who was 9 when her brother was born, and Ruth, who was 7. John grew up in Conjola on a farm on Ridge Road. Your Honour will now see a photo come up on the screen of John taken in 1944 in the arms of his dad. Sadly, John, aged 3, lost his dad to a silica rail truck accident at Redhead, Bendalong in 1947. So John was thereafter brought up by his widowed mum Ruby and his older sisters, with the assistance of his grandparents Bill and Mary Martin. From a young age, John had his own pony and then horse, and he became an accomplished bush horseman. He attended school at Milton Public School from 1950 through until 1959. The court will shortly see a photo provided by Butt's family, taken in 1948, here it is, with John on his pony in the presence of his grandfather, Martin. After leaving school, John worked in a dairy. He worked as a log cutter. He owned his own log truck business. He ran cattle in the bush, worked in an orchard as dealing with feral animal control, and he owned a farm at Braidwood on which he ran cattle, along with a couple of farms in the Milton district where he worked. Butt had a jovial and friendly disposition with a cheeky sense of humour which endeared him to many. Your Honour is told that he was easily recognised by his black akubra. A photo is now going to appear on the screen showing Butt in 1949, again with his grandfather Martin and the draft horse team. John had lived at Conjola, Arulan, Braidwood, and then back to Conjola and Yatayata. He was an accomplished horseman and a crack shot. He'd been employed when living at Arulan to remove feral animals from some of the properties in the area. Your Honour will now see a photograph of Butt taken in 2019, wearing his favourite black akubra, and apparently taken at his favourite place in town, being the Milton Bakery. John became the father of Johnny Butler Jr. in 1984 with his partner Merlene. John enjoyed horse racing and often travelled to Maruya to watch the races. In his 70s, many people around Milton knew Butt, as he had a daily routine of going to Milton Bakery for his morning coffee and a custard tart. He would then reliably go to the service station for a chat and then to the IGA to get some groceries. He would then make his way back home, where he was residing at the old Yatayata schoolhouse. John had worked on many fires in the area over the years, with backburning fires in the winter months to provide food for cattle in the bush, and he was familiar with the nature of bushfires in the area. For instance, his family tell the court that bushfires in 2002, and in particular on January 7th of that year, created havoc in Conjola. John helped to fight those fires. He was familiar with fires in the bush and their unpredictable nature, dependent on weather conditions. John's family described December 31, 2019 as our black day. They have their own memories of what the weather was like on that day, as so many of his family lived nearby and had to fight to protect their own houses across the course of the day. In particular, the court knows that Butt had spoken to Ken, his nephew, who has provided many of the details in this family statement, around 11:30 a.m. on 31 December, and that Butt then again spoke to Andrew Wheatley, a long-term family friend, at around 10 minutes past noon. His family say that being familiar with other fires, Butt probably did not realise the ferocity of this particular fire and the minute window of time he had to evacuate. They can't for sure, but they wonder whether Butt hesitated and then decided to leave when he saw smoke approaching. Later that night, some of Butt's family, including Ken and Brett, went to look for Butt. And we know that Andrew Wheatley and his wife also went to look for Butt that night. But they couldn't find him. Butt's family wondered, had he made it to Milton or did he go down to the lake? And Your Honour will be aware from some evidence within the brief that many members of the Lake Conjola and Conjola community ultimately took shelter in the lake on the 31st of December. Butt's family say that the catastrophic damage to the area left fires and buildings burning well through that night and into the next day. John's family remember that when he was actually found, John was still wearing his iconic akubra. They conclude the family statement by saying, Vale, our uncle, John Butler, Butt, father of Johnny, and a lovable larrikin. Your Honour, I'll now read a statement from the family of Laurie Andrew. But before I start, I'll also note that Laurie's partner, Michelle, has also shared her own memories of Laurie with the council assisting team in the course of preparing for the hearing and right up to the lead up of this week's hearing. A photograph of Laurie is shortly going to be shown on the screen, provided by his family. Lawrence Allen Andrew, or as everyone called him, Laurie, was born on the 24th of February 1949 at the family home in the fishing village of Maidens, Ayrshire, on the southwest coast of Scotland. He was the youngest of 4 boys and brother to Brian, Les and Ian. His family moved to Australia in 1960 when Laurie was 12, and he couldn't believe his luck when they arrived at a place that overlooked Freshwater Beach. His family then settled in the Sutherland Shire, and it was there that Laurie found his love of the surf and made many lifelong friends. In 1971, Laurie bought a fishing shack in Killarney on Lake Conjola. It looked directly over the lake and had its own jetty. He and his wife Leslie would spend weekends out of the city renovating the shack. Laurie fell in love with Conjola. Your Honour will now see a photo of Laurie taken at Myrtle Gully. In 1980, Laurie and Leslie moved to a property they built together on Egan's Farm Lane, Yada Yada, followed by moving to the adjacent property across the gully in 1984. This is the Myrtle Gully property, where together they built their home. Laurie loved his home in Myrtle Gully. It was a place that he'd built. It was where he'd raised his family. It was his sanctuary, and he didn't often venture far from there. Your Honour's now going to see a photo of Laurie taken with baby grandson Arthur, Christmas 2019. Laurie loved his family above all else. Family was most important to him, and he gave love, help and support without question whenever it was needed. He was most excited by his 2 new grandchildren that came along in 2019. Having travelled days by car from Myrtle Gully to Port Hedland and back, just in order to visit his new granddaughter Bonnie as soon as she was born. And Your Honour will now see a photograph of Laurie with Bonnie taken in August of 2019. Laurie was very humble, but his family remember him for his bravery. In 2005, he was awarded a Bravery Medal for rescuing 2 children from Conjola entrance on New Year's Eve in 2001. On that day, Laurie was going for a surf at Green Island, Conjola Beach. The surf was very big. On his walk along the beach to the island, 2 kids in an inflatable boat being dragged out of Lake Conjola entrance on the outgoing tide. Without a second thought, Laurie immediately jumped into the entrance with his board and paddled out to rescue them. By the time he reached them, they were in the break zone and they had lost their boat. Laurie's board had also snapped off and he had to balance a kid on each shoulder while treading water well beyond the break zone out to sea. He managed to pull them into shore about 1 kilometre down the beach and returned them to the search party, then picked up his board and returned to the car without being noticed. Your Honour will here see a photo showing David, Leslie and Lindsay with Laurie. And then the photo now on screen, Your Honour, shows Lindsay, Laurie, Kate, David, Leslie and the other David on David and Kate's wedding day. Laurie's family tell Your Honour that he loved the surf, he loved football and he loved music. He was a hard worker and was always busy with a project. Laurie was a good friend to many and he would help anyone who needed it. He is forever missed and forever loved by his family, Leslie, David, Kate and baby Arthur, Lindsay, David and baby Bonnie.
Thank you, Ms Ward, and thank you very much to the families who've provided those beautiful words for us to hear from Michael, John and Laurie. It is always such a special thing when we get to hear more about the loved ones from those who love them and know them and know them best. I'm very conscious that hearing about that terrible day on the 31st of December 2019 must be extremely difficult for the families and friends of Michael, John and Laurie. We understand that, we acknowledge that, and just know that our thoughts are very much with all of you today. And again, thank you for providing those beautiful words about your loved ones.
Your Honour's inquiry into the 2019-2020 bushfires will continue tomorrow with a hearing into the North Black Range Palerang fire.
Thank you, Ms Ward. We'll adjourn today and resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow.